Welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to explore a question. Why is it that after the age of 35, women begin to value good men? You may have seen this phenomenon before, or perhaps you're in this situation yourself and simply haven't put a name to it yet. A woman, just a few years earlier, may have said that she didn't believe in marriage. She said she needed freedom, experiences, and emotions. Kind, stable men who think about the future were often not on her list of priorities, not because they were bad, but because at that time, they didn't make her heart race strongly enough. Then, at some point, often after 35, you start hearing very different things. She begins talking more about stability, about a decent man, about commitment, about family, about not wanting to waste any more time. And if you are a responsible man, someone who is thoughtful and long-term minded, you may suddenly find yourself being noticed, valued, looked at differently. This, in itself, is not wrong, and there is nothing to condemn here. People change, life changes, everyone has the right to grow and mature over time, but the issue lies here. When you've observed long enough, heard enough stories, and witnessed enough relationships form and then fall apart, you may begin to ask a very simple question. What has really changed? Has her inner values truly changed? Or has her surrounding context changed? Does she genuinely desire a different type of man? Or does she now need a type of man that fits better with the current stage of her life? I'm not saying this to judge right or wrong, nor am I trying to make you doubt anyone. I simply want you to pause for a moment, breathe more slowly, and look at this phenomenon with a calmer perspective. Because how you understand this shift will greatly influence the choices you're about to make next. There is something very important that many men need to hear, and it is rarely said in a calm, honest way. Good men do not suddenly appear after the age of 35. They are not a new product of society, nor are they a last resort option simply because time has passed. In reality, they have been there all along. They were present in the early 20s, the late 20s, and even the early 30s. They continued to live responsibly, to build their lives, to take relationships seriously. It's just that, for most of that time, they were not prioritized. And this may sound uncomfortable, but it's not because they lacked value. It has far more to do with how attraction works when people are young. In youth, emotions tend to lead the way. People are drawn toward intense experiences, dramatic emotional swings, and relationships full of unpredictability. These things create highs. They create the feeling of being alive. Meanwhile, kind, stable, consistent men often do not create strong emotional spikes right away. They don't make hearts race within the first few meetings. They don't cause sleepless nights filled with anxiety or excitement. And because of that, they are easily overlooked not because they are bad, but because they don't match the emotional tempo of that stage of life. This is no one's fault. It is simply how human psychology operates when there is abundant energy, many options, and little consideration of long-term consequences. The issue only begins to emerge later, when those same men with the same personalities, the same values are suddenly seen differently. At that point, good men are described as precious, rare, and worthy of appreciation. But if you are the one in that role, you have every right to ask yourself, why am I being seen now, when I wasn't before? This question is not meant to accuse anyone. It simply helps you place things in the proper context. Because when you understand that you were never less in the past, you stop blaming yourself. And when you understand that you simply weren't prioritized at a certain stage, you will view the attention that comes later with clearer eyes, more slowly, more calmly, and more fairly toward yourself. When talking about the changes that occur after the age of 35, I want to clarify one thing from the very beginning. This is not a story about panic. It is also not a story about someone suddenly becoming afraid and making rushed decisions. What is happening in most cases is a form of delayed awareness, when people begin to look back at their lives from a different perspective. And this does not happen only to women. Men experience similar shifts as well. They simply tend to manifest in different ways. The first change, and also the most important one, is related to time. When we are young, time feels like something that is always ahead of us. It can be slowed down. Mistakes can be made. We can start over, but once a certain threshold is crossed, often after 35, that perception changes. Time is no longer something to be spent freely. It becomes something to be considered carefully. People begin to think more seriously about the question, if I continue like this for another 5 years, what will happen? Not out of fear, but because for the first time, they truly understand that some doors will not remain open forever. The second change lies in choices. When we are young, choices seem endless not only in relationships, but also in careers, lifestyles, and social circles. There is a sense that one can always meet someone new, start again, rebuild from scratch. But over time, the number of choices is no longer as abundant as before. Not because people become lesser, but because life gradually reorganizes itself. Friends become more settled, social dynamics shift, and spontaneous, uncommitted opportunities to meet others naturally become fewer. When choices are no longer infinite, people begin to evaluate them differently. The third change is that the desire for stability becomes clearer. In earlier stages, stability may be seen as boring, restrictive, or something that comes later. But after going through enough relationships, enough beginnings and endings, people begin to understand that stability is not just about safety. It is about the ability to build. It is the foundation that keeps life from constantly feeling precarious. And at this point, many women begin to look at good men through a different lens. Not because those men have suddenly become more attractive, but because their role in the larger picture of life has become clearer. What is important to remember is that none of this is moral in nature. It does not declare who is right or who is wrong. It simply reflects how people change when context changes. And when you understand this, you will stop personalizing everything. You will no longer think that you are being chosen now because you are better than before, or that you were overlooked in the past because you were lesser. You will see that many decisions in life, especially those related to relationships, are made not because people fundamentally change, but because their perspective on time, choices, and the future has shifted. There is one very important point in relationships that many people fail to clearly separate, which leads to misunderstanding. That is the difference between valuing something and truly desiring it. In everyday life, these two are not always the same. There are many things we know are good for us. We know health matters. We know eating well is the right thing to do. We know that sleeping enough, exercising regularly, and living with balance will improve our lives. But knowing something is good does not mean we always want it. Many people clearly understand the value of healthy habits, yet still struggle to genuinely desire them each day. Not because they are foolish or lack willpower, but because desire is an emotional response as well valuing is a cognitive process. When applied to relationships, this distinction becomes even clearer. Valuing someone is usually a rational decision. We look at who that person is, their stability, kindness, an ability to build a future and say, this is a good person to commit to long term. This decision often comes with very reasonable justifications. In contrast, desiring someone is far more instinctive. It does not require a checklist. It does not need explanation. It appears early, quickly, and often outside the control of logic. We do not choose desire, we simply feel it. The issue is not which one is right or wrong. Both have a place in life. Value helps us build. Desire makes us feel alive. Problems arise when these two are confused with each other. When someone says they appreciate you, value you, and need you in their life, that can be completely true. But it does not necessarily mean they desire you in a deep, instinctive way. And conversely, there are relationships filled with desire but lacking the foundation to last long term. Understanding this difference is not meant to make anyone feel worse. It simply helps you see more clearly the nature of the emotions you are receiving. When you know in what way you are being valued, you will feel less confused, hold fewer misplaced hopes, and stop convincing yourself that two fundamentally different things are, in fact, the same. When a relationship begins from need rather than from genuine desire, there is something that can very easily happen, something many people do not immediately recognize. That is, the pressure of expectation is often higher from the very beginning, not because anyone intentionally creates pressure, but because the relationship itself is carrying a very heavy role. It is not just about affection, it also carries hopes for stability, for the future, for the sense that life is finally moving onto the right track. When someone enters a relationship with the mindset that they need it in order for their life to become more stable, they unconsciously place greater expectations on their partner. They hope the other person will not only be a romantic partner, but also a support system, a foundation, an answer to many accumulated insecurities from the past. And when expectations are high, disappointment becomes easier to appear. These disappointments rarely explode into major conflicts. They usually exist in very subtle forms, quiet comparisons that sometimes even the person experiencing them is not fully aware of. Comparisons to an idealized image once held in the mind. Comparisons to intense emotions experienced in the past, not because they are still in love with someone from before, but because those emotions once existed and the memory of them remains. From there, a gentle but persistent dissatisfaction can emerge. Not severe enough to leave, but not deep enough to feel fully satisfied either. You can sense this through small details. The initial excitement does not last very long. Intimacy becomes more about responsibility than spontaneity. Complaints begin to appear more often than admiration. And if you are the one inside that relationship, you may feel as though you are constantly trying to meet expectations, to be enough, to avoid disappointing the other person. What is important to state clearly here is that this does not happen because she is a bad person. It also does not mean she is intentionally trying to hurt you. In many cases, she may not even understand why she feels this way herself. The root of the issue lies in the original emotional foundation. When a relationship is built primarily on necessity, safety, and the desire for stability, it tends to lack one very important element: unconditional desire. And when that element is not strong enough, the relationship can still exist, can still function, but it requires more effort from both sides. Understanding this is not meant to make you fearful or suspicious of all relationships that begin later in life. It simply helps you see why, in some cases, even when there are no obvious major problems, quiet tension still exists. And when you realize that its source lies in how the relationship began, rather than in who is right or wrong, you gain the ability to view everything more calmly and to make more grounded decisions for yourself. At this point, perhaps the most important thing is no longer to analyze anyone's psychology or circumstances, but to return to your own lived experience within that relationship, not to judge, but to listen to your own feelings more honestly. There are a few simple questions you can ask yourself, questions you don't need to answer for anyone else but yourself. When she's with you, is she genuinely curious about who you are? Does she want to understand how you think, what you care about, what makes you happy or sad, or do most of your conversations revolve around whether the two of you are suitable for building a stable life together? There are relationships where you feel seen as a whole human being, but there are also relationships where you feel more like a reasonable piece in a larger plan. This difference is very subtle, but if you pay attention, you will feel it. Another question relates to the feeling you receive. Do you feel admired? Not polite compliments, but the sense that the other person truly values who you are? Or are you mainly appreciated for your stability, your ability to provide, for what you can contribute to a shared life? Both of these have value, but they create very different experiences for the person inside the relationship. When someone is admired, they usually feel lighter, more natural, without having to strain to prove themselves. When someone is mainly needed, they may feel that they must always hold their role, always meet expectations, always be enough. I am not offering a rigid checklist here because every relationship has its own context. What matters is that you learn to trust your intuition. Intuition does not always speak in words. It often appears as a feeling of ease or tension, a feeling of being yourself or having to play a role. When you give yourself enough time to listen to these signals, you will know whether you're in a relationship where you're chosen for who you are or needed for the role you fulfill. And when you realize that, you do not need to rush into any decisions. Simply being honest with your feelings is already a very big step. In the end, I want to say this as simply as possible. Everyone has the right to change. People do not remain fixed at one point in life. We learn, collide with reality, experience loss, and then see things differently. Women have the right to look back at their choices and want something different for the future. That is not wrong, and it does not need to be judged. But alongside that, you also have your own rights. You have the right to choose a relationship that aligns with who you are, with what you need, and with how you want to live the rest of your life. Not every relationship that feels safe is a relationship that makes you happy. Safety is important. Stability is necessary. But a long-term relationship requires more than that. It needs natural desire, without forcing. It needs the feeling of being respected, admired, and seen as a person, not merely as a solution for the future. When these two elements do not exist together, a relationship can still survive, but it often demands more silent sacrifice. And sometimes, those sacrifices come from the person who does not dare to admit that something very fundamental is missing. I'm not here to tell you what you should do. I'm not saying you must leave or hold on to anyone. The purpose of everything you have just heard is simply to help you see things a little more clearly. When you clearly understand your position in a relationship, you no longer need to convince yourself, nor do you need to justify your feelings. And before you enter any bigger commitment, give yourself a quiet moment. Ask yourself one very honest question. Are you being chosen for who you are, or for the timing of when you appeared? You don't need to answer right away. Being honest with yourself is enough.